Hello, business and professional writing students. This is the Unit 4 memo, the Unit 4 lecture on memo writing. So I'm just going to say this now. This is going to be short because I had to turn off my air conditioner because it was too loud and you wouldn't have been able to hear me talking. So it's really hot in here and you know it's 100 degrees today. So I'm going to have to do this quickly. But here we go. Talking about memos and how do you write them. So you might be wondering, what is a memo? That's a great question. Memo is short for memorandum. And a memo is written typically to be used for internal communication at a business or an organization. And that means that it's going from one person within a company to another person in that company. So it's not being used to travel outside of a company or organization. It's staying within that company. A memo is generally seen as a concise way to inform a group of people about a certain topic, a new policy, or an update to a project, or even a request for action. And memos are typically informal, much less formal than letters, unless the memo is going to someone much higher up in rank, and then the memo will be more formal. And memos should also be understood by a large group of people, because typically memos, or often memos, go to people of various ranks and positions and from different backgrounds. So it's ideal for a memo to be, if it can be understood by a large number of people. So memos are generally short and to the point. However, if there is a considerable amount of information that, for whatever reason, needs to be attached to this memo, you would use what is called an enclosure. So an enclosure is just like the attachment we use when we send an email. However, an enclosure is the actual physical paper or papers that follow that contain the additional information. So in terms of the way it is written, a professional memo is always going to come on company letterhead. So the first thing that you're going to see is the company's name in the letterhead, and then after that we're going to have a format very similar to email: to, and then from, and then the date, and then subject. So the to line, typically it just has the person's name. Because memos are internal documents sent within a company or organization, the people who are sending and receiving the memo typically know one another's titles. So I'll use myself as an example. Let's say I'm sending a memo to my boss, Charles Nelson. So the to line would say Charles Nelson. It does not need to include his title, which is Executive Director English. The from line would say from : Mia Fiore. It does not need to include my title, which would be Coordinator English Department Kane Ocean. So again, that is because we know one another's titles. The next line is going to be the date. So there are several ways you can do this. It could be written as July 29th, 2025, or my preference, 29 July 2025. Either one is fine. Just be consistent. And then the last line is the subject line. So I don't want to bore you with the minutia of the details here, but there are several ways you can use capitalization in the subject line. You can choose to capitalize only the first letter of the first word, or you can use what is called the headline effect, headline style. And that means that you're going to capitalize the first letter of every word, which is my preference. Or you can go for the third option, and this means that you're going to capitalize everything, even articles like in or the. So it's up to you. You can do whichever you prefer. Again, just be consistent. That means pick the one you like and stick with it. So there are two other things that you should be able to recognize in the heading of a memo. The first is CC, and that stands for carbon copy. And if you see this in the heading, it indicates that another copy of this memo is being sent to someone other than the recipient, and that other person's name will follow after the CC. Now, something else you might see is BCC, and this stands for blind carbon copy. And this would be used to indicate that there is a recipient other than the person identified in the to line. However, this person's name is not seen and is being withheld. Okay, so moving on to the text of a memo. So I'm going to break this down. I think there are about nine different considerations or characterizations of memos and the way that they're written that you should be familiar with. And I'll try to post this as a list later in an announcement. But just to keep things simple, again, 9 characterizations of memo writing. So number 1, the writing style is informal unless the memo is going to someone higher up. And in that case, the memo would be written in a more formal tone. 2, any information contained in a memo should be summarized in a list that is either bulleted or numbered. 3, the first line of a memo is not indented the way you would typically indent the first line of a paragraph. 4, each paragraph in a memo should be separated by a white space. So if you're writing one paragraph and you're about to move on to the second one, before you do that, skip a space. 4, a memo does not need to end with a formal closing such as yours truly or sincerely. However, 5, you do want to end a memo with a concise statement as to the action the writer would like the recipient to take. And I believe this is 6. Reference initials. What are reference initials? Okay, let's say that I am the writer of the memo, meaning that I composed it and I'm its author. But I don't have a computer, or I have an administrative assistant who types much more quickly than I do. So I did not type the memo, my administrative assistant did. So my initials, Mia Fiore, are MF. And let's say my administrative assistant's initials are Susan Jones. So after the headline and after the text and after the last line, which concisely states the action you would like the recipient to take, it's going to say reference initials. First, my initials, MF, which are capitalized, and then a slash, and then the initials of my administrative assistant. And if you were thinking that they are going to be lowercase, you were right, you got it. My administrative assistant's initials will appear after the slash mark, and they will be lowercase. Now, the last thing that might appear, or the last element of a memo that you should be familiar with, is the enclosure. And I think this is, I think this is 8 or 9 that we're on. So this would be at the very end if there is any information that follows, which you did not want to burden the reader with in the first page, because the reader simply wouldn't have, because it's too much. You want to indicate that there is an enclosure. So you would just write enclosure, and then you have 2 choices. You can either write enclosures with an S, that is if there's more than one, and you would indicate the number of titles or documents that follow. So if there are 3 different documents or 3 different titles, it would say enclosures, comma, 3. If there's only one enclosure, obviously you don't need to do that. It would just say enclosure. Or you could provide the titles or the names of the 3 documents that follow in the pages constituting the enclosure section. So that would read enclosures, comma, and then the name of each title or the name of each document. And that's it, guys. Those are the important aspects of memo writing. And the assignment for this week for the memo is to research a company that you're interested in and imagine that you have a position at this company. And then Canvas gives us 2 scenarios. One of them is imagine that, write a memo from Human Resources announcing a new policy that is being added. So I started to do this assignment just so I could talk to you about it a little and also imagine myself in your position. I would just urge that you choose a company or organization that you are genuinely interested in. So I chose Harvard and University of California at Santa Cruz. I chose schools or universities because I love school and education and learning. I could be in school forever. I chose Harvard because it's Harvard, and UC Santa Cruz because I went there and I love California. So I started to research policy changes at UC Santa Cruz, didn't find any. And then I looked up policy changes at Harvard, and I found a ton of policy changes at Harvard that have been enacted over the past few years. And so this was interesting for me to read, and it was fun to start doing. And the reason I'm telling you this is because, I would urge you to choose a company or an organization that you are genuinely interested in, because it will make the assignment that much less work and maybe even a little bit of fun. Also, you need to consider your audience when writing a memo. And again, if it's an organization or a business that you genuinely are interested in, going the extra step to learn, well, who the audience be, that too will be somewhat enjoyable to you. Like in the case of Harvard, a memo from Human Resources is going to most likely go to students, faculty, other staff and employees, from the person who maintains the garden to the chef in the dormitory, possibly even various media outlets. So okay, well, I'll stop here. I hope this was helpful to you, and I hope you're staying cool, and I look forward to reading your memos. Bye.